Great empires are remembered for their laws and armies, but they were built on something more fundamental. The true power of a state lies in its ability to connect, to bind its farthest reaches into a single, governable whole. This is the story of the 25 road systems that did exactly that, forging coherent nations from scattered lands across millennia. By the end, you will understand the hidden blueprint of political power, from ancient stone highways to the digital networks of today. How did a 2,500-mile Persian courier route hold an empire together? And what can its dusty path teach us about modern superpowers? What is the one thing every ambitious civilization, from the Incas to our own, has felt compelled to build? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but where does that path truly lead? 2,500 years ago, a single road redefined the very concept of distance. It was not just a path through the wilderness, it was a statement of intent carved into the earth itself. This was the Royal Road of the Achaemenid Empire, a ribbon of packed earth and stone that stretched for more than 1,500 miles, connecting the glittering capital of Susa in modern-day Iran all the way to Sardis on the coast of Anatolia, what is now Turkey. For its time, this was a distance that bordered on the mythical, a journey that could take an ordinary caravan 3 grueling months to complete. But the Persian Empire did not have 3 months to spare. Its survival depended on speed. The true genius of the Royal Road was not its length, but its purpose. It was built not for trade, though merchants certainly used it, but for control. It was the central nervous system of the first true superpower. Along its entire length, the Persian administration established a network of 111 relay stations, each stocked with fresh horses and dedicated couriers. A message from the King of Kings could now race from one end of the empire to the other in a mere 7 days. Imagine the sheer psychological impact of that. A governor in a distant province could no longer plot in isolation, believing the throne was months away from hearing news of his rebellion. The empire now had reflexes. An order, a decree, a royal judgment could arrive with shocking speed, delivered by a dust-covered rider who represented the immediate and undeniable presence of the king. This system bound together a mosaic of cultures, languages, and ancient kingdoms into a single coherent state. The Persian rulers, brilliant administrators, understood that to govern such diversity, you needed consistency and communication. The Royal Road allowed for standardized laws to be disseminated, for taxes to be collected and transported, for troops to be moved to flashpoints with efficiency. It turned a collection of conquered territories into an integrated empire. The couriers, immortalized by the Greek historian Herodotus with the phrase, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds," were more than just mailmen. They were the living, breathing pulse of imperial will. In building this road, the Achaemenids created a template. They proved that the size of a state was no longer limited by how far a man could walk in a season, but by how fast an idea could travel. And once that blueprint existed, every empire that followed would feel compelled to draw its own lines upon the map. But the Persian blueprint was just the beginning. Centuries later, another civilization would take this concept of the binding road and forge it into iron, creating a network so vast and so enduring that its ghost still shapes the map of Europe today. The Roman Empire did not just build roads, it engineered destiny. Their story begins not with an empire, but with a single strategic necessity. In the year 312 before the Common Era, the Roman Republic was locked in a bitter struggle for control of southern Italy. To secure a vital military corridor to the port city of Brundisium, the censor Appius Claudius Caecus ordered the construction of a highway. This was the Via Appia, the Appian Way. It was a declaration of a new standard. Unlike the winding paths that followed the natural landscape, Roman engineers insisted on the most direct route possible. They cut through hills, drained marshes, and paved over valleys with massive stone blocks fitted together with astonishing precision. The result was a road so straight, so solid, that it was famously said, "All roads lead to Rome." But the truth is even more profound. All roads from Rome led to conquest. This was the core military logic. A Roman legion, with its heavy equipment and disciplined formations, could march 25 miles a day on these engineered surfaces, a speed unmatched by any adversary. When rebellion flared in a province, the response was not a slow muster of scattered forces, but the thunderous, predictable arrival of professional soldiers moving with the efficiency of a machine. The road network was the empire's circulatory system, and the legions were its lifeblood, pumped to the farthest extremities at a moment's notice. Yet the genius of the system was its dual purpose. Those same smooth highways that carried armies out also carried the essence of Roman civilization back in. Tax collectors could travel reliably, ensuring wealth flowed to the capital. Traders transported goods from British tin to Egyptian grain, binding the provincial economies to Rome. But most importantly, the roads carried ideas. Roman law, Latin language, architectural styles, and even civic values traveled along these routes. A retired soldier could settle in Gaul or North Africa, connected to home by a physical path. A local chieftain, seeing the undeniable advantages of Roman engineering and commerce, might seek integration rather than resistance. The road was not just a tool of domination, it was an invitation. It physically manifested the Roman promise of order, security, and prosperity under a single rule. By the empire's height, this network spanned over 250,000 miles from the rainy highlands of Scotland to the deserts of Syria. Each mile was measured from a golden milestone in the Roman Forum, a literal symbol that every corner of the known world was connected to the heart of the empire. The roads bound vast territories into a coherent state not just through force, but by making the benefits of being Roman tangible and accessible. They turned conquered lands into integrated provinces where a man could travel for months and still be, in a very real sense, under the same sky, governed by the same principles, walking on the same kind of road. It was an infrastructure of identity. While Roman engineers laid stone upon stone, a world away, another empire was weaving its own binding thread across a landscape far more formidable. High in the Andes, where jagged peaks scrape the sky and deep valleys plunge into shadow, the Inca civilization achieved the impossible. They built the Qhapaq Ñan, a road network spanning more than 25,000 miles without the wheel, without iron, and without beasts of burden. This was not a system of conquest through speed, but of integration through sheer, breathtaking will. The terrain dictated a different kind of genius. Instead of straight Roman highways, the Inca roads were masterpieces of adaptive engineering. They carved staircases into cliff faces, suspended fiber bridges over roaring rivers, and cut tunnels through solid rock with nothing but stone tools and relentless labor. The roads clung to mountainsides, connecting a realm that stretched from modern-day Colombia all the way to central Chile. This empire, called Tahuantinsuyu, or the Land of the Four Quarters, was a mosaic of hundreds of different cultures and languages. The Qhapaq Ñan was the literal and symbolic cord that tied them all to the sacred center, the city of Cusco. But how do you administer such a vertical, fractured world? The Incas answered with a system of breathtaking efficiency and ideological power. Along the roads, at precise intervals, they built way stations called tambos. These were not inns for the public, but state-controlled hubs. Here, imperial runners known as chasquis would relay messages and lightweight goods in a constant, human-powered relay. A message or a fresh batch of seafood from the coast could race from one end of the empire to Cusco in a matter of days, a feat that still defies belief. More importantly, the tambos housed massive state storehouses filled with food, textiles, and tools produced by local communities as a form of tax. This was the heart of the Inca social contract. In times of local hardship, like a poor harvest, these state reserves would be open to support the community. The road system enabled a redistribution of wealth, ensuring no region fell into famine, and in turn, binding its people to the benevolence of the Sapa Inca, the divine emperor in Cusco. The roads were also sacred pathways. They guided ritual processions and pilgrimages to important holy sites, physically moving people through a landscape infused with spiritual meaning, always leading them back to the empire's core. To travel the Qhapaq Ñan was to experience the tangible reality of Inca rule, its logistical power, its economic care, and its spiritual authority, all woven into the very path beneath your feet. It was a tool that didn't just move armies, it moved minds, convincing diverse peoples that their survival and their place in the cosmos were inextricably linked to the empire that built these roads to the heavens. Yet the Inca system, for all its brilliance, connected a single, centralized empire. A different kind of web would soon span entire continents, one woven not by imperial decree but by desire. This was the Silk Roads, a name that conjures images of a single, dusty caravan trail, but in reality describes a sprawling, shifting web of land and sea routes connecting the workshops of China to the marketplaces of Rome. For over 1,500 years, this network did something unprecedented. It bound together not a single state, but dozens of rival empires, kingdoms, and city-states into a vast, interdependent economic system. No single emperor controlled it, yet it dictated the fortunes of nations. The true commodity traded was not just silk, or spices, or porcelain, though these luxuries fueled the dreams of kings. It was something far more powerful. It was ideas. A Buddhist monk from China could travel these routes to study scriptures in India. A Nestorian Christian could carry his faith from Persia to the courts of Central Asia. Technological secrets like the art of papermaking migrated slowly westward from China, revolutionizing how societies recorded knowledge. Even diseases traveled these highways, reshaping populations in ways no army ever could. This created a fragile, fascinating interdependence. The prosperity of a merchant in Venice could hinge on the political stability of a Mongol Khanate 5,000 miles away. If war closed a mountain pass in the Pamirs, the price of pepper would soar in Alexandria. For the first time in history, the world experienced a form of globalization, where events in one corner of Eurasia sent ripples across the entire known world. Rulers quickly understood this. They did not build the Silk Roads, but they competed fiercely to control and protect key segments of it. They built caravanserais, fortified inns where traders could rest safely, knowing their protection was a state priority. They standardized weights and measures along certain corridors to ease commerce. The road bound these disparate political entities not through shared laws or a common flag, but through a shared interest. It was in everyone's benefit to keep the goods and the gold flowing. This created a loose, often tense coherence. A conflict between the Persian and Byzantine empires wasn't just a territorial dispute, it was a threat to a vital economic artery that fed both their treasuries. The Silk Roads demonstrated that territories could be bound into a coherent system, not just by force from above, but by mutual need woven from below. It was the first great experiment in international connectivity, proving that even without a single ruler, the path of commerce could stitch the world together. For over 2,000 years, a single road has served as the backbone of the Indian subcontinent, a river of humanity flowing through the heart of a continent. This is the Grand Trunk Road, a route of such ancient pedigree that it is said to follow the path of a legendary king's journey in the epic Mahabharata. Its story is not of a single empire's creation, but of a permanent geographical logic, a line so vital that every power that rose in the region felt compelled to claim it, improve it, and march its armies down its length. It began as a collection of local trade paths, but its true transformation came under the Mughal Empire. Emperor Sher Shah Suri, in the 16th century, saw its potential not just as a path but as a spine. He systematized it, building a proper highway shaded by trees, dotted with wells and rest houses every few miles, connecting his capital in Bengal deep into the Punjab. The Mughals who followed, most notably Akbar the Great, expanded and maintained this artery. It stretched from the fertile deltas of Bengal in the east all the way to Kabul in Afghanistan in the west, stitching together a realm of staggering diversity. This was the road's true power. Along its route, one could hear a dozen languages, see the temples, mosques, and shrines of countless faiths, and encounter goods and customs from across Asia. It carried not only silks and spices but pilgrims, scholars, and artists. A style of painting developed in one court could travel this road to influence another. A culinary technique or a musical rhythm could migrate with the caravans. The Grand Trunk Road made the subcontinent's incredible cultural mosaic physically navigable, allowing a Mughal emperor in Delhi to project his authority and his vision of order across a landscape of ancient kingdoms and principalities. Its solid surface allowed for the rapid movement of the empire's elite cavalry and artillery, a show of force that could quell rebellion with intimidating speed. But its legacy took a darker turn with the arrival of European powers. The British East India Company, and later the British Crown, recognized the road for exactly what it was, the central nervous system of the continent. They paved it, bridged it, and straightened it, not to unify a culture, but to control a colony. For the British, the improved Grand Trunk Road was a tool of military logistics, enabling them to swiftly deploy troops to put down challenges to their rule. It facilitated the efficient extraction of raw materials from the interior to coastal ports for shipment to Britain. The road that had once carried the cultural currents of empires now served the machinery of colonial economics. Yet, even under this new purpose, the road's essential nature persisted. It remained the great connector, the stage upon which the drama of the subcontinent unfolded, proving that a road's meaning is never fixed. It is a channel, and what flows through it, whether it is the unifying vision of an emperor or the controlling hand of a foreign power, defines what kind of nation it builds. Centuries before Rome laid its first stone, another empire was mastering the art of connection on a continental scale. In ancient China, the end of the Warring States period left a landscape shattered by centuries of conflict, a patchwork of rival kingdoms with different laws, different currencies, and even different widths for their cart axles. The man who united them, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, understood that true unity required more than just military victory. It demanded a physical and bureaucratic system to make one China a tangible, governable reality. His solution was a revolution in infrastructure. The Qin dynasty did not merely build roads, they standardized the very idea of movement itself. One of their first and most profound decrees was to mandate a universal axle width for all carts and chariots. This seemingly minor technical detail was a stroke of administrative genius. Suddenly, a vehicle from any corner of the new empire could travel on any imperial road without getting stuck in the ruts carved by a different standard. It forced economic and logistical integration, binding local economies to the imperial center. The roads they built, often rammed earth highways lined with trees, radiated from the capital, Xianyang, like spokes on a wheel, reaching deep into the newly conquered south and the strategic northern frontiers. But roads are just stone and dirt without a system to give them purpose. The Han Dynasty, which followed, perfected this system into something resembling a state-controlled internet. They established a vast network of postal relay stations known as yizhen. These were not simple rest stops. They were meticulously spaced nodes of imperial power, each stocked with fresh horses, carriages, food, and dedicated couriers. An official dispatch, sealed with clay and marked with its urgency, could race from the farthest commandery to the capital in a matter of days. This created a flow of information with a reliability that was unprecedented for its time. The emperor in Chang'an could receive reports from a distant governor, deliberate with his ministers, and send back binding orders within a single season. This changed the fundamental nature of governance. A local official knew his actions would be reported swiftly, and the central authority's response would arrive just as fast. It made rebellion a far riskier prospect and enabled a consistent top-down administration across a territory that spanned from the steppes to the tropical south. The system moved more than just scrolls. It moved people. Imperial inspectors, tax collectors, and military officers could travel with state-sanctioned speed and comfort, their journeys pre-arranged and supplied by the yizhen network. This allowed the central government to rotate officials, preventing them from building up local power bases that could challenge the throne. It also meant armies could be mobilized and directed with a coordination that smaller, fragmented states could never match. The road and courier system became the steel framework upon which the idea of a unified, centralized Chinese state was built and maintained for millennia. It turned a geographic expanse of incredible diversity into a coherent political entity, proving that to govern a continent, you must first build the lines along which your will can travel. The spiritual heart of Islam, Mecca, did more than draw the faithful for prayer. It drew lines across the face of the earth. For over a millennium, a vast network of pilgrimage routes, known collectively as the Darb al-Hajj, has converged on the holy city like arteries leading to a single, powerful heart. These were not casual paths, but formal, state-sponsored highways developed and meticulously maintained by successive caliphates and sultanates. They transformed the religious obligation of Hajj into a powerful force for political and cultural cohesion. The most famous of these was the Darb Zubaydah, named for the wife of the Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who championed its development in the 8th and 9th centuries. Stretching over 900 miles from the cultural capital of Kufa in Iraq to Mecca, this was a road of astonishing infrastructure. Caliphal engineers built way stations or mansions at regular intervals, each equipped with wells, reservoirs, guest houses, and even mosques. They marked the route with stone pillars and cleared it of obstacles, creating a safe, reliable corridor through the harsh Arabian desert. This was a monumental act of statecraft. By investing immense resources into the pilgrim's journey, the Abbasid Caliphate was doing far more than earning religious merit. It was physically binding its vast and diverse territories to the symbolic center of the Islamic world. A pilgrim from Persia or Syria traveling to Mecca would, for weeks or months, walk on a road built and protected by the caliph's authority. They would drink from his wells, rest in his shelters, and travel under the umbrella of his peace. The journey itself became a profound lesson in belonging. It connected the individual believer not just to God, but to the idea of the Ummah, the global community of Muslims, and to the political entity that claimed to be its protector. The routes also pulsed with economic life. While the primary purpose was spiritual, these roads naturally became channels of commerce. Caravans of pilgrims were also caravans of merchants. Goods, ideas, and artistic styles traveled alongside the faithful. A textile pattern from Baghdad might find its way to a workshop in Medina. A philosophical debate started in Damascus could be continued in a rest house in the Najd. The Darb al-Hajj facilitated a constant, gentle exchange that helped standardize Islamic culture across continents, from Andalusia to Central Asia. The Caliphate, by ensuring the safety and viability of the pilgrimage, solidified its role as the indispensable guardian of the faith. This gave it a legitimacy that mere military power could not provide. The road to Mecca, therefore, was a two-way street. It carried believers towards spiritual fulfillment, and it carried political authority back into the farthest provinces, woven into the very fabric of a shared, sacred journey. It proved that the most binding roads are not always built for conquest or commerce, but for the human spirit, and in serving that spirit, they can forge empires of meaning. Far from the stone highways of Rome or the sacred paths to Mecca, a different kind of network was taking shape in the heart of North America. Along the great Mississippi River and its countless tributaries, a civilization rose whose power flowed with the water. The Mississippian culture, flourishing from around 800 to the 1600s, created a world connected not by paved imperial roads, but by a natural lattice of waterways and a complementary web of overland trails. This system bound together a vast territory from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, centered on colossal earthen mounds that served as both temples and political capitals. The greatest of these was Cahokia, located near modern-day St. Louis, a city that at its height around the year 1100 rivaled the population of contemporary London. Cahokia did not rule a formal empire with edicts and armies, but its influence radiated outward for hundreds of miles, carried along these liquid highways. The Mississippi and its sister rivers were the continent's first interstates. In dugout canoes, people transported astonishing quantities of goods. Shells from the Gulf Coast traveled north to be carved into sacred gorgets, a type of pendant. Copper from the Great Lakes region was hammered into ceremonial plates and headdresses for elite burials. Flint from quarries in modern-day Illinois and Arkansas was shaped into tools and weapons that found their way to distant villages. This was more than simple trade. It was a ritualized exchange that reinforced social and spiritual bonds. The movement of these exotic materials, often used in ceremonies or as markers of status, wove a shared material culture across the landscape. But the connection was not solely economic. The waterways and trails were pilgrimage routes. People would travel great distances to participate in grand ceremonies at the major mound centers, events tied to the agricultural cycle and cosmic order. At Cahokia, they would witness the sunrise over Monk's Mound, a 100-foot-tall earthen pyramid, aligning with celestial events. They would take part in games like Chunky, a sport involving rolling stone discs and throwing spears, which served as both spectacle and a ritual with deep social meaning. These gatherings disseminated a common set of beliefs, artistic styles, and political concepts. A local chief, by acquiring goods from Cahokia or adopting its ceremonial practices, could enhance his own authority, linking his community to the prestige of the great center. This created a coherent cultural sphere, a vast interaction zone where people shared a way of seeing the world, even without a single emperor issuing commands. The trails that snaked through the forests and prairies, often following ridges or animal paths, connected the riverine network, allowing for the movement of ideas and people during seasons or in regions where canoe travel was impractical. Together, the rivers and trails formed a resilient, organic binding agent. They allowed the Mississippian world to function as an integrated whole, a symphony of exchange and shared belief that turned a continent's interior into a connected realm, proving that coherence can emerge not just from top-down decree, but from the currents of common purpose and the paths walked by generations. But the binding power of a path does not always flow from an emperor's command. In the shadowy centuries after the fall of Rome, Europe shattered into a mosaic of warring feudal kingdoms, a continent seemingly defined by its divisions. Yet across this fractured landscape, hundreds of thousands of ordinary people began to walk. They were not soldiers or merchants, but pilgrims, and their destination was a distant corner of northwestern Spain, the shrine of St. James at Santiago de Compostela. What began as a trickle of the devout would by the high Middle Ages become a river of humanity flowing along a network of trails known as the Camino de Santiago. This was not a road built by a state, but one forged by faith, and its impact would quietly reweave the fabric of a broken continent. The pilgrim did not carry a sword, but a scallop shell, the symbol of St. James, and a simple need for shelter and safety. To meet this need, an entire infrastructure spontaneously emerged. Monasteries, seeing both spiritual duty and opportunity, built hostels and hospitals along the routes. Kings and local lords, recognizing the economic potential and the prestige of serving the faithful, constructed bridges over treacherous rivers and paved sections of muddy track. Towns like Burgos, Leon, and Pamplona grew from humble stops into thriving urban centers, their economies fueled by the constant stream of pilgrims needing food, shoes, repairs, and lodging. The Camino became a corridor of commerce long before it was ever mapped by cartographers, but it carried more than just coins and travelers. A monk from Germany might walk for months alongside a farmer from France and a noble from Italy. In the shared hardship of the road, in the communal sleeping halls of the hostels, a subtle exchange took place. They shared stories, songs, and architectural ideas. The distinct Romanesque and later Gothic styles of church architecture did not spread by royal decree. They traveled footstep by footstep, carried by pilgrims who saw a beautiful new chapel in one town and described it in the next. Musical traditions, literary tales like the Song of Roland, and even culinary innovations migrated along these paths. This constant flow created something Europe desperately lacked, a shared cultural language that transcended local dialects and feudal borders. The pilgrimage to Santiago fostered a nascent sense of being part of Latin Christendom, a community defined not by who ruled you, but by what you believed and what journey you undertook. For a Europe fractured by endless petty wars, the Camino offered a different vision, one of movement, connection, and a common destination. It bound the fragmented territories not with laws but with stories, and not with force but with the weariness and hope found in 1,000 pairs of walking shoes. The road to a saint's tomb, it turned out, could do what armies could not. It could begin to make a continent feel whole again. While pilgrims walked the Camino, another empire was perfecting the art of sacred infrastructure on a grander scale. The Ottoman Empire, at its zenith under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, faced a unique challenge. It ruled a breathtakingly diverse realm stretching from the gates of Vienna to the sands of Yemen, a patchwork of cultures and faiths held together by the Sultan's claim as the protector of Islam. To make this claim real, he turned his engineers toward the desert. His most celebrated project was the meticulous fortification and provisioning of the Syrian pilgrimage route, the Darb al-Hajj al-Shami. This was no mere path, it was a state-sponsored lifeline to Mecca. Suleiman ordered the construction of a chain of imposing fortresses, way stations, and massive cisterns along the entire route from Damascus to the holy cities. These structures, often built with beautiful Ottoman architectural flourishes, served a clear dual purpose. They offered sanctuary, water, and medical care to the thousands of pilgrims undertaking the arduous journey, earning the Sultan immense goodwill and religious legitimacy. But they also functioned as secure garrison points for Ottoman troops. By planting its flag in the middle of the desert, the state physically asserted its control over the most important spiritual journey a Muslim could make. It protected pilgrims from Bedouin raids, but it also monitored the flow of people and ideas, ensuring that this powerful annual migration reinforced, rather than challenged, Ottoman authority. The pilgrimage caravan itself, departing with great ceremony from Damascus led by a richly decorated Mongol palanquin, became a mobile symbol of Ottoman power, a procession of faith chaperoned by the state. Yet Suleiman's vision for binding his empire was not limited to desert tracts. In the rugged Balkans, his engineers rebuilt and secured ancient Roman roads like the Via Militaris. turning them into swift military corridors. These roads allowed the Sultan's elite Janissary Corps and formidable artillery trains to move with shocking speed across mountainous terrain that had once defied armies. A rebellion in Bosnia or Hungary could be met not with a slow, seasonal campaign, but with the sudden, overwhelming force of a centralized military machine. This network of roads did more than move troops. It moved administrators, tax collectors, and judges, weaving the complex legal and bureaucratic fabric of Ottoman rule into every province. Together, the sacred highway to Mecca and the military roads of the Balkans formed the two halves of Ottoman statecraft. One road served the soul of the empire, legitimizing the Sultan's rule in the eyes of the faithful from Cairo to Baghdad. The other served its sword, ensuring that dissent anywhere could be efficiently addressed. This combination bound territories as different as Greek Orthodox valleys and Arab trading ports into a single, coherent political entity. It demonstrated that to hold an empire of incredible diversity, you needed to build roads for both the pilgrim and the soldier, understanding that power flows along the paths of both devotion and control. The Mongol Empire conquered with the speed of a lightning strike, but it ruled with the steady pulse of a well-ordered network. At its heart was a system so effective it made the vastness of the steppe irrelevant, the Yam. Established by Genghis Khan and expanded by his successors, this was not a road in the traditional sense, but a chain of relay stations spaced a day's ride apart, stretching from the borders of Korea to the gates of Hungary. In an empire defined by distance, the Yam collapsed it. A single rider carrying urgent military intelligence or a decree from the Great Khan would gallop to a station, leap onto a fresh, pre-saddled horse, and continue his sprint without pause. The message, not the man, traveled at a relentless pace. This allowed a surprisingly small Mongol ruling elite to coordinate armies separated by thousands of miles, orchestrating campaigns with a synchronicity that left their enemies bewildered and outmaneuvered. A general in Russia could know the disposition of forces in Persia within weeks, not months, enabling grand strategic moves across continents. But the Yam was more than a military tool. It was the central nervous system of administration. Imperial officials, tax collectors, and inspectors traveled under its protection, using passports called paisi to obtain fresh mounts and provisions. This constant, authorized movement allowed the Mongols to govern through a light but effective touch, relying on local administrators while ensuring their loyalty was monitored and their tribute flowed reliably back to the center. The stations themselves, often staffed by local communities obligated to provide service, became nodes of imperial presence in remote regions, a physical reminder of the Khan's far-reaching power. The system also served as an unparalleled intelligence network. Merchants, travelers, and spies moved along these protected routes, their observations funneling back to the Mongol court. The Khans often knew of political shifts or economic troubles in distant lands before the local rulers themselves did. This river of information granted them a form of foresight, allowing them to preempt rebellions or exploit weaknesses with chilling efficiency. By mastering the flow of information and people across the largest contiguous land empire in history, the Yam transformed a collection of conquered territories into a coherent, if short-lived, superstate. It proved that in the age of the horse, the empire with the fastest messengers held the world in its grasp. Yet the Mongol horse relay was a system built for an empire of the steppe. In the heart of Europe, a different kind of state was being forged, one that would use roads not just for communication, but for the deliberate construction of a centralized nation. For centuries, France was a patchwork of powerful duchies and counties, each with its own laws, customs, and even dialects. The king in Paris was often a distant figure, his authority fading with every mile from the capital. This began to change not with a dramatic battle, but with a simple, profound shift in how the kingdom viewed its own dirt. The medieval network of local footpaths and muddy tracks maintained haphazardly by local lords was no longer sufficient. Under visionary ministers like Sully in the early 17th century, and later the brilliant Colbert under King Louis XIV, France embarked on a monumental project. They built the routes royales, the royal roads. These were not mere improvements. They were instruments of political will, engineered highways that radiated from Paris like the beams of the Sun King's symbolic sun. Their purpose was explicitly stated: to bind the kingdom together under the absolute authority of the monarch. Every curve straightened, every marsh bridged, was a step toward eroding provincial independence. The logic was military and economic. A rebellion in a distant province like Brittany or Languedoc could no longer fester in isolation, believing the royal army would be slowed by autumn rains and broken lanes. Now, on these new, hard-surfaced roads, the king's regiments and, crucially, his artillery trains could move with predictable speed and force. The threat of swift retribution became a powerful deterrent, physically manifest in the very road that led to a rebel's doorstep. But the roads served a more subtle, enduring purpose. They integrated France's economy into a single national market. Before, a merchant moving goods from Lyon to Paris faced a chaotic journey of varying tolls, poor surfaces, and unreliable bridges, all controlled by local nobles. Colbert standardized this. He reduced internal tolls, improved river navigation to complement the roads, and ensured the highways were maintained by a central authority. This meant wine from Bordeaux, textiles from Normandy, and wheat from the Beauce could flow to Paris and between regions with new efficiency. Wealth began to circulate along these royal channels, enriching the state treasury and making the economic health of the provinces dependent on their connection to the capital. The roads also carried the French language and a nascent sense of national identity. Royal decrees, administrative orders, and cultural ideas traveled faster and more reliably than ever before. A local official in Provence now had to correspond with Paris in a standardized French, gradually diminishing regional dialects. The road made the abstract idea of France tangible. A traveler could journey from the Spanish border to the Low Countries and, despite regional differences, remain on a road built by the same king, under the same administrative rules, heading toward the same luminous center. The routes royales were the steel skeleton upon which the flesh of the modern French nation was built. They transformed a loose collection of feudal territories into a coherent, centralized state, proving that sovereignty could be paved into the very landscape, one carefully measured league at a time. From the sunlit courts of Versailles, the gaze of empire turned westward to a continent of unimaginable scale and wealth. There, the Spanish crown faced a challenge that dwarfed even the ambitions of European kings: to bind a new world to the old. Their tool was not a single road, but a network of caminos reals, royal roads, that clawed their way across mountains, deserts, and jungles. The most legendary of these was the Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, the royal road of the interior land, a 1,500-mile artery of imperial ambition stretching from the vibrant heart of Mexico City to the remote northern frontier of Santa Fe. This was not merely a trade route, it was the silver-lined lifeline of an entire colonial world. Its primary purpose was brutally clear: to channel the immense wealth of New Spain back to the imperial treasury. From the legendary silver mines of Zacatecas and Potosi, trains of mules known as requas plodded south along this road, their bells echoing through canyons as they carried tons of precious metal. This silver paid for Spanish armies in Europe, funded its wars, and fueled the global economy, but it first had to travel this treacherous, meticulously regulated path. The road was a conduit for imperial control in every form. Along it traveled soldiers from presidios, their presence meant to secure the route against indigenous resistance and to enforce crown authority in distant settlements. Franciscan and Jesuit missionaries walked this same dust, moving north to establish missions. seeking to convert and integrate native populations into the Spanish social and spiritual order. Settlers followed, bringing with them European crops, livestock, and legal systems, planting towns that were physical extensions of Spanish culture in an alien landscape. The Camino Real made the vast viceroyalty of New Spain a coherent, if strained, entity. A dispatch from the viceroy in Mexico City could reach a provincial governor in weeks, not months. Royal decrees, architectural styles, and even news from Spain traveled this single, vital thread. It created a fragile continuity where a church built in a remote adobe village in New Mexico consciously echoed the Baroque designs of the capital 1,000 miles to the south. The road bound the territory not through harmony, but through a constant, forced circulation of wealth, of faith, and of power, all flowing along a path that served as the stark, physical proof that these distant lands were now irrevocably part of a global empire's design. The silver flowing from New Spain was the lifeblood of an old empire, but a new kind of power was rising from coal, smoke, and iron. As the 18th century dawned in Britain, the kingdom faced a crisis of movement. Its roads were a national disgrace, muddy quagmires in winter and dusty ruts in summer, relics of a medieval past wholly unfit for a future driven by machines. The state had neither the funds nor the will to rebuild them, so Britain turned to an experiment in private enterprise that would literally pave the way for a revolution. Parliament began granting charters to local turnpike trusts. These were not government agencies, but groups of local investors, merchants, and landowners who pooled their capital with a simple proposition. They would take over a specific stretch of road, improve it with proper drainage and a hard surface of broken stone, and in return they could charge travelers a toll at a gate or turnpike. It was capitalism applied directly to the dirt. The system spread like wildfire. By the 1770s, over 15,000 miles of British road were under the control of hundreds of these trusts. The transformation was immediate. Where a wagon laden with wool or pottery might have crawled at 2 miles an hour, now it could maintain a steady 4 or 5. Stagecoach services exploded, their timetables becoming a new standard of reliability. A journey from London to Edinburgh, once a perilous 3-week expedition, was reduced to a manageable 2 days. This was more than convenience, it was the acceleration of an entire society. The turnpikes bound the emerging industrial regions into a cohesive national circuit. Raw cotton from the port of Liverpool could reach the mills of Manchester on a predictable schedule. Finished textiles from those mills could flow south to London for export, or north to Scottish markets, with a speed that made large-scale production viable. For the first time, a businessman in Birmingham could think in terms of a national, rather than just a local customer base. But roads had their limits, especially for the monstrous weight of the Industrial Revolution's appetite. Coal, iron ore, and clay are brutally heavy and cheap per ton. Moving them by wagon, even on a good turnpike, was prohibitively expensive over any real distance. The solution was found not on land, but by reshaping the land itself. Visionary engineers like James Brindley began cutting artificial rivers, canals, across the British countryside. Funded by similar groups of private investors, these watery highways created a new logic of transport. A single horse pulling a barge on a canal could move 50 times the weight it could pull on a road. The economics were transformative. The price of coal in Manchester, once cripplingly high, plummeted when canals like the Bridgewater brought it directly from the mines. Pottery from Josiah Wedgwood's factories in Staffordshire, previously too fragile and costly to ship far, now glided smoothly on canals to a waiting world, his brand becoming a household name across the nation. The canals did something profound. They made geography optional. They linked the coal fields of the Midlands to the ironworks of Wales and both to the great port cities. They turned disparate regional economies, once isolated by bad roads and high costs, into interlocking components of a single, integrated machine. England, Wales, and Scotland were no longer just neighboring kingdoms under one crown. They were becoming a unified economic organism. The turnpike trusts and the canal companies, for all their profit-driven motives, laid the physical groundwork for a coherent British state capable of projecting unprecedented global power. They created the internal market that fed the factories and the distribution network that sent their products to every corner of the globe. The binding of the nation happened not by royal decree, but by share certificate and toll booth, proving that sometimes the road to unity is built by those seeking not an empire but a return on investment. The turnpikes of Britain accelerated commerce, but a young nation across the Atlantic faced a far more existential question of connection. In the decades following the American Revolution, a profound political and geographic rift threatened to tear the fragile Union apart. The original 13 states clung to the Atlantic coast, their economies and loyalties oriented toward Europe. But beyond the formidable barrier of the Appalachian Mountains, a new world was rapidly taking shape. Settlers poured into the Ohio Valley, carving farms from the wilderness and founding towns that felt a world away from the power centers of Philadelphia and Washington. These western territories, soon to become states like Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, were economically isolated. Their farmers produced bountiful harvests, but with no reliable route to eastern markets, their grain rotted, and their allegiance to a distant federal government grew tenuous. The threat was clear. Without a physical bond, these western lands might well form their own separate nations, drawn by the mighty current of the Mississippi River toward New Orleans and away from the United States. The solution was conceived as a line of national unity, drawn in gravel and stone. This was the National Road, originally called the Cumberland Road, the first major public works project funded entirely by the federal government. Authorized by Congress in 1806 and beginning construction in 1811, its mission was starkly political: to bind the restless West irrevocably to the East. Starting in Cumberland, Maryland, it pushed westward like a deliberate, extending hand, following old military trails and forging new paths across the mountains into the heart of the continent. It was built to an impressive standard, 60 feet wide with a stone foundation and a graded gravel surface, a veritable highway through the wilderness. Its immediate effect was to unleash a torrent of movement. Conestoga wagons, those iconic covered wagons painted a distinctive blue, became a constant stream, their wheels carving deep ruts into the roadbed. They carried families seeking new lives, their belongings piled high, alongside peddlers, preachers, and land speculators. But more importantly, they carried the agricultural wealth of the interior eastward. Now, a farmer in central Ohio could load his surplus corn or pork onto a wagon, and after a journey of weeks rather than impossible months, reach the bustling markets of Baltimore and Philadelphia. This economic linkage was transformative. It gave Western settlers a tangible stake in the success of the Union, turning them from isolated frontiersmen into connected citizens. The road also pumped Eastern goods and influence westward. Manufactured tools, textiles, and news from the capital flowed back along the same route, making the styles, laws, and political debates of the coastal states a regular feature of frontier life. Taverns, blacksmith shops, and entire towns sprang up to serve the traffic, creating a ribbon of economic development that followed the road's precise path. The National Road became a rolling classroom of American identity. A traveler on this road would encounter people from every state, hear a cacophony of accents, and witness the sheer scale of the nation unfolding before them. It physically demonstrated that the United States was not just a legal agreement among states, but a continuous, traversable space. By the time it reached Vandalia, Illinois, in the 1850s, spanning over 600 miles, it had achieved its fundamental purpose. The Ohio Valley was no longer a remote frontier. but an integrated part of the national economy and political body. The road had preempted separation, proving that for a republic born from rebellion, survival depended on building more than just ideals. It required a road that could carry the weight of a nation's future, one wagon at a time. But the American road was a path to unity, while in the East, another empire faced a challenge of almost incomprehensible scale. The vastness of Russia was not just a geographic fact, it was the central problem of its existence. For centuries, the Tsars ruled a realm where the western capital of St. Petersburg felt a world apart from its own eastern territories. To govern this colossus, they developed the tract system, a network of state post roads that began as simple tracks through the forest and evolved into the arteries of imperial ambition. These roads were the threads with which Russia sought to sew its European core to its Asiatic frontiers. The ultimate expression of this was not a road of commerce, but one of conquest and control, the Great Siberian Road, a staggering path that would eventually stretch over 4,000 miles from Moscow to the Pacific port of Vladivostok. Its construction, spanning the 19th century, was an act of sheer will against a landscape of taiga, mountain ranges, and frozen tundra. This was no inviting highway for settlers, at least not at first. It was built with a stark, dual purpose. Primarily, it was a military and administrative corridor, allowing the Tsarist government to project its power deeper into Siberia than ever before. Regiments could be marched east to secure new territories and suppress indigenous resistance. More importantly, officials and tax collectors could now travel with some regularity, imposing Russian law, language, and orthodoxy on distant communities, slowly weaving them into the fabric of the empire. The road enabled the systematic extraction of Siberia's immense wealth, particularly furs and later minerals, funneling resources back to the European heartland. Yet the tract system carried another, darker traffic. It became the central route of the Katorga system, the forced exile of prisoners to the penal colonies of Siberia. For countless individuals deemed enemies of the state, from intellectuals to peasant rebels, the road east was a one-way journey into oblivion. They walked in chains along this very route, a grim procession that physically manifested the state's absolute power to remove and isolate dissent. In a terrible irony, this flow of forced labor also became an instrument of colonization. Many exiles, after serving sentences, were settled along the road, forming the nuclei of new towns and villages. The road itself, therefore, bound the territory through a combination of administrative control, economic extraction, and human suffering. It transformed Siberia from a mythical, inaccessible wilderness into a governed, if harshly exploited, extension of Russia. The Great Siberian Road made the empire's claim of being a transcontinental power a tangible reality. A traveler or a prisoner could now walk from the grand cathedrals of Europe to the shores of the Pacific on a single, continuous, state-maintained path. It was the ultimate expression of the tract system's logic, proving that to hold an empire of such staggering scale, you must build a road long enough to make the farthest corner feel like it is still within the grasp of the throne, no matter the human cost to pave it. The Great Siberian Road was a monument to territorial ambition, but a new kind of highway would soon be built for a different kind of unity. In the 1930s, a network of concrete ribbons began to unfurl across the German landscape, the Autobahn. To the world, it was presented as a breathtaking feat of modern engineering, a symbol of national rebirth and technological prowess under the Nazi regime. But beneath the sleek curves and overpasses lay a calculated design far more profound than simple transportation. This was infrastructure as ideology poured into the earth. The Autobahn was conceived as a physical instrument to forge a unified German Volk, or people. For centuries, the German states had been a patchwork of regional identities, dialects, and loyalties. The new highways were meant to literally drive over these old divisions. by enabling citizens from Bavaria to travel swiftly to Prussia or from the Rhineland to Saxony. The regime aimed to create a shared national experience, to make Germans feel they belonged to a single, powerful community moving forward at high speed. The roads were deliberately routed through scenic areas, framed as journeys through the beautiful German homeland, reinforcing a romantic blood and soil connection to the landscape. This was not just about connecting cities, it was about connecting souls to a prescribed national identity. Of course, the design had a stark military logic. The long, straight stretches and gentle curves were engineered not for safety, but for the rapid movement of troops and mechanized divisions. The Autobahn network was a strategic grid that would allow the Wehrmacht to shift forces from the French border to the Polish frontier with terrifying efficiency, a key component in the regime's plans for aggressive expansion. This function became horrifyingly clear as the network itself expanded. Following the annexation of Austria in 1938, construction immediately began on stretches intended to bind the Ostmark, the new Eastern Territory, into the Reich. Similar projects pushed into the Sudetenland and other absorbed areas. The Autobahn was to be the symbolic and practical thread stitching a greater German Reich together, physically imposing a new political reality on the map. Concrete in this vision was more binding than any treaty. It was a permanent claim. The project was a masterclass in using modern infrastructure to serve ancient ambitions of unity and control, demonstrating that a road could be built not for where people wanted to go, but for where a state demanded they belong. The Autobahn was built to enforce a single ideology, but another highway would be conceived with a very different dream. It began not with a dictator's decree, but with a vision of peaceful connection across an entire hemisphere. In the early 20th century, a spirit of Pan-Americanism was taking hold, an ideal that the nations of the Americas were natural partners, bound by geography and shared interests. From this ideal emerged the most ambitious road project ever conceived, the Pan-American Highway. Its goal was audacious in its simplicity, a single, continuous motor route stretching from the frigid tip of Alaska to the southernmost city of Argentina, a journey of over 19,000 miles that would physically link the continents. The dream was to create a ribbon of asphalt that would foster trade, tourism, and cultural exchange, turning the abstract idea of a unified hemisphere into something you could literally drive through. Sections began to be built piece by piece, nation by nation. You could drive from the United States deep into Mexico on smooth federal highways, or cruise through the modern arteries of Chile and Argentina. The highway became a powerful symbol, a testament to engineering and cooperation, promising that a family could embark on the ultimate road trip, traversing deserts, mountains, and rainforests from one pole of the Americas to the other. But this grand vision ran into a stubborn, unmovable reality. On the map, the route appears complete, a bold line from north to south. On the ground, in the border region between Panama and Colombia, the line simply stops. Here lies the Darien Gap, a 60-mile-wide swath of dense, roadless rainforest, swamps, and mountains. This is not a place where construction was merely difficult. It is where the dream of seamless connection collides with the immutable forces of nature and politics. The jungle is so thick, the terrain so treacherous, and the environmental concerns so profound that for decades, engineers and governments have deemed building a road through it economically unfeasible and ecologically catastrophic. This gap is more than a missing link in pavement. It is a revealing fissure in the very idea of continental unity. It highlights the limits of political will against primal geography. It shows that while nations can agree on maps and treaties, binding a continent requires conquering landscapes that resist conquest. The Darien Gap has become a paradoxical symbol. For the Pan-American Highway, it represents an enduring failure, the one place where the binding road remains a phantom. Yet it also stands as an accidental guardian, a natural barrier that has slowed the spread of diseases, protected unique ecosystems, and maintained a cultural buffer for indigenous communities. The highway, in its incomplete state, tells a dual story. It showcases humanity's relentless drive to connect, to shrink the world through sheer effort and cooperation. Simultaneously, it humbly acknowledges that some divides, whether wrought by nature or by the complex tapestry of national interests, are not so easily paved over. The dream of a road from Alaska to Argentina remains, a monument not to a finished reality, but to the enduring aspiration that the paths we build can make us neighbors across impossible distances. The dream of a continental highway is not unique to the Americas. In the decades following independence, a new vision for unity was being drafted across Africa. Emerging from the shadow of colonial borders drawn for extraction, not connection, the newly formed Organization of African Unity, later the African Union, conceived of a master plan. This was the Trans-African Highway Network, a blueprint for 9 major highways that would stitch the entire continent together, a web of asphalt designed to write a new story of self-reliance. Its goals were a direct response to a colonial past. For centuries, infrastructure in Africa was built to serve external powers, with railways and roads running like narrow spokes from resource-rich interiors directly to coastal ports, funneling wealth overseas. The new network aimed to turn that logic inside out. By building robust east-west corridors, it sought to connect landlocked nations like Niger, Chad, and Zambia directly to their neighbors, reducing their crippling dependency on distant ports in other countries. The vision was economic and profoundly political. By making it easier to transport goods from Dakar to Djibouti or from Cairo to Gaborone, the highways would boost intra-African trade, allowing farmers in Uganda to sell to markets in Kenya and manufacturers in Nigeria to find customers in Ghana. This, the architects believed, would foster the kind of economic interdependence that could solidify political integration, making the dream of a truly united Africa a tangible, drivable reality. Yet the map on paper tells a different story from the ground under tire. While several corridors, like the highway from Cairo to Dakar or the route connecting Mombasa to Lagos, have long stretches of paved road, the network remains a patchwork. The vision collides daily with the hard realities of funding, geography, and governance. Maintaining thousands of miles of roadway across deserts, rainforests, and mountain ranges is astronomically expensive, and many nations struggle to allocate scarce resources from health and education budgets to remote asphalt. Political instability in certain regions has left sections unfinished or crumbling, creating gaps where the continental highway dissolves into a treacherous dirt track. A truck driver hauling goods from the port of Dar es Salaam to the interior might find a smooth, modern highway suddenly give way to a mud-soaked path for 100 miles, adding days and immense cost to a journey meant to be seamless. These ruptures in the network reveal the ongoing challenge. Building the road is one act of will, but maintaining it as a permanent, reliable bond requires a continuous commitment to cooperation and shared investment that is still evolving. The Trans-African Highway Network stands as a powerful symbol of a continent's ambition to define its own connections, to turn colonial lines of extraction into modern arteries of mutual growth. Its incomplete state is not a failure, but a snapshot of a long journey in progress, a reminder that the most binding roads are those we choose to build for ourselves, and the most difficult mile to pave is often the last. While the Trans-African Highway Network reimagined continental connection, another system was already reshaping a nation with the quiet hum of tires on concrete. The United States Interstate Highway System did not emerge from a dream of trade or unity, but from a cold calculation of national survival. Its architect, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, carried a formative memory from the Second World War, witnessing the terrifying efficiency of the German Autobahn for moving military divisions. He saw in those wide, limited access roads a lesson for American vulnerability. In a potential conflict, how would the nation move troops and material across its vast breadth if its roads still wound through every small town main street? The answer was signed into law in 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act, a project sold to the public for defense, funded as a public works program, but destined to rewire the very DNA of American life. This was not merely road building, it was the creation of a national grid, a 41,000-mile lattice of standardized concrete designed for speed and unimpeded flow. Its defense logic was clear. The system was officially named the Dwight D. Eisenhower National System of Interstate and Defense Highways, and 1 out of every 5 miles was mandated to be straight, allowing it to double as an emergency airstrip. For the first time, the military could envision moving an entire armored division from Texas to New Jersey in days, not weeks, binding the country's defensive posture into a single, rapid response mechanism. But the interstate's true impact was far more profound than its military rationale. It fundamentally altered the American relationship with space and distance. Long-haul trucking exploded, as goods could now move from factory to store with clockwork predictability, enabling the just-in-time inventory systems that would define modern retail. Regional economies dissolved into a truly national market. A box of strawberries from California or a car from Detroit could appear anywhere in the country within a predictable window. This binding of commerce was absolute, making the United States the world's most efficient continental economy. Yet this connectivity came with a centrifugal social force. The interstates did not just connect cities, they allowed people to flow out of them. With fast, reliable roads, living miles from your workplace became not just possible but desirable. The system fueled an explosion of suburbanization, as new housing subdivisions sprouted at interstate off-ramps like leaves on a vine. The classic American downtown, once the inevitable center of commerce and community, began to hollow out, its economic life bleeding out to highway-accessible shopping malls and office parks. This physical reshaping accelerated a subtle cultural homogenization. As families crisscrossed the country on vacations, they encountered not regional distinctness, but a comforting sameness. The same chain restaurants, the same gas station logos, the same roadside attractions at every exit. The interstate created a portable national experience where the landscape outside your car window changed, but the services you relied on remained familiar, building a shared, if standardized, cultural identity viewed at 65 miles per hour. The system bound the territory into a coherent, defensible, and efficient whole, but in doing so, it rewrote the rules of community, commerce, and landscape, proving that a road built for the movement of armies could ultimately mobilize an entire way of life. Concrete highways could bind a nation, but could they weave a continent? In the decades following the Second World War, a new political experiment took shape in Europe, one that sought to replace centuries of rivalry with a union of shared prosperity. The European Union understood that a common currency and open borders were not enough. True integration required a physical foundation, a lattice of steel and asphalt that would make the idea of Europe something you could see from a train window. This vision became the Trans-European Transport Networks, or TENT, a master plan for a continent-wide web of high-speed rail lines, modernized roads, and smart freight corridors. Unlike the interstate system born from defense or the colonial roads built for extraction, TENT is an openly political project, a deliberate act of engineering unity. Its core mission is to make the European single market not just a legal concept, but a logistical reality. The goal is seamless movement. A business in Warsaw should be able to ship goods to Lisbon with the same ease and predictability as to a city in its own country. A student in Barcelona should be able to board a train and be in Paris for lunch, not as a grand adventure, but as a simple, affordable commute. By erasing the friction of distance between member states, the network aims to boost competitiveness, allowing European companies to operate on a continental scale, rivaling the economic might of the United States and China. But the ambition runs deeper than economics. The network is strategically designed to reduce the stubborn disparities between Europe's wealthy core and its less developed periphery. By building a major rail corridor connecting the Baltic states to Central Europe, or a modern highway threading through the Balkans, the EU invests in cohesion. It physically pulls these regions into the economic mainstream, offering them a tangible stake in the Union's success. This is nation building on a continental scale, using infrastructure as a tool to balance development and prevent the kind of economic fractures that could lead to political ones. Perhaps most profoundly, TENT seeks to foster a shared European identity. When you can live in one country, work in another, and study in a third, all connected by a fast, reliable train network, your sense of belonging begins to shift. The borders on the map start to feel less like barriers and more like administrative lines. The experience of crossing them becomes routine, even invisible. This daily, physical experience of connection does what 1,000 political speeches cannot. It makes Europe feel like home. The high-speed rail line is not just a train, it is a classroom of continental citizenship. The network, therefore, represents a quiet revolution. It is the belief that peace and unity are not just maintained by treaties in Brussels, but by the very tracks and roads that link its capitals, binding a mosaic of ancient nations into a single, coherent, and ever closer union. The European network is a tapestry of cooperation, but across the world, another system was being built with a force and speed that defied all precedent. In the span of a single generation, China laid down more miles of high-speed road than any nation in history. Its national trunk highway system, a web of expressways often called the NTHS, is not merely a transportation project. It is the concrete manifestation of a national transformation, a deliberate engineering of economic and political unity on a continental scale. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. From a mere few hundred miles in the late 1980s, China's expressway network exploded to over 100,000 miles by the year 2020, surpassing even the total length of the entire United States interstate system. This was not a gradual evolution, it was a controlled explosion of infrastructure, planned and funded with singular focus by the central government. The primary engine was economic necessity. As China's coastal regions like Guangdong and Shanghai became the workshops of the world, they faced a critical bottleneck. They needed raw materials, energy, and labor from the country's vast interior and western provinces, and they needed to ship finished goods back out with ruthless efficiency. The old rail and road networks were hopelessly inadequate. The expressway system solved this with breathtaking directness. It created high-speed corridors that slashed travel times from weeks to days or even hours. A container truck could now race from a factory in Shenzhen to a consumer market in Beijing on a smooth, tolled highway, a journey once plagued by unreliable roads and provincial checkpoints. This binding of coast and interior was the circulatory system of the economic miracle. It allowed capital, technology, and managerial expertise from the developed East to flow inland, while resources and migrant labor from the West could reach the industrial zones. It turned the entire country into a single, integrated production platform, enabling the just-in-time supply chains that powered China's export-driven growth. Yet the purpose was always more than economic. The expressways serve a profound political logic of unified development. For centuries, China's western regions, like Xinjiang and Tibet, were remote frontiers, difficult to govern and culturally distinct. The new highways physically bound these territories to the political and economic core. they enable the swift movement of administrative personnel and facilitate the flow of Han Chinese migrants and entrepreneurs into these areas, promoting cultural and demographic integration. More tangibly, they allow the fruits of national growth in the form of consumer goods, infrastructure investment, and even tourism revenue to reach these regions, offering a tangible argument for stability and belonging within the nation. The expressway, therefore, is a tool of homogenization and control, ensuring that no province, no matter how distant, can easily chart an independent course when it is literally connected by a multi-lane concrete ribbon to the power of the state. This network demonstrates a modern truth that in the 21st century, the binding of vast territories is achieved not with couriers on horseback, but with container trucks thundering through the night, carrying both prosperity and the unyielding presence of central authority down every newly paved lane. China's expressways bound its own territory with concrete certainty, but a far grander design was already being sketched upon the map of the world itself. This is the Belt and Road Initiative, a 21st century vision so vast it seeks to weave together continents. It presents itself as a modern rebirth of the ancient Silk Roads, but on a scale its ancestors could never have conceived. The initiative unfolds along two colossal pathways. On land, the Silk Road economic belt aims to create a new lattice of railways, pipelines, and highways stretching from central China through Central Asia and onward to Europe. By sea, the 21st century maritime Silk Road envisions a chain of modernized ports and shipping lanes linking the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean. Together, these land and sea corridors are designed to create an integrated China-centric network spanning more than 60 countries across Asia, Africa, and Europe. The stated ambition is one of mutual development to enhance trade and connectivity for all involved. Ports in Sri Lanka and Pakistan are upgraded with Chinese investment, allowing for faster shipment of goods. Rail lines now connect factories in inland China directly to markets in London, carrying electronics and textiles in containers that once traveled by slower sea routes. A landlocked nation in Central Asia might gain a new highway or railway link, offering it an alternative route to global markets. This infrastructure addresses genuine needs, filling gaps in regional connectivity that other powers or private capital have been unwilling or unable to fund. Yet the scale of the investment reveals a deeper geopolitical logic. By financing and building the physical sinews of trade and transport across such a vast expanse, the initiative seeks to bind these regions into a coherent economic sphere with China at its logistical and financial heart. When a country relies on Chinese companies to build its main port, on Chinese loans to finance its key railway, and on Chinese consumer demand for its exported goods, a profound interdependence takes shape. This creates a network of influence built not on military bases, but on debt, infrastructure, and supply chain necessity. The initiative reorients traditional trade maps, encouraging partners to look eastward, to align their economic futures with Beijing's vision. It is a long-term strategy of shaping the world's connective tissue, ensuring that the roads, rails, and ports of the future are built to Chinese standards and serve Chinese strategic interests. Like the ancient Silk Roads, it moves more than commodities. It moves standards, labor practices, and diplomatic alignments. The Belt and Road Initiative represents the ultimate evolution of the Binding Road, a project that transcends national borders to sketch the blueprint for a potential new world order, one where coherence is not enforced by an empire's legions, but woven through the quiet, steady work of engineers and bankers, laying down a path for the 21st century. The ancient roads of stone and dirt have finally dissolved into beams of light. Today, the most powerful binding agents are not carved into mountainsides, but pulsed through glass threads buried beneath the ocean floor and bounced between satellites in the silent dark of space. Digital infrastructure is the modern empire's road, and its highways are built of fiber optic cables and wireless signals. This network performs the same ancient function as the Royal Road or the Inca Qhapaq Ñan, but at the speed of thought, enabling a form of coherence and control that would have seemed like pure magic to any emperor of the past. Consider how a modern nation-state functions. Its government no longer waits weeks for dispatches from a distant province. Tax filings, census data, and emergency alerts flow in real time through secure digital channels, allowing for instantaneous policy adjustments and resource allocation. A health crisis in one city can be tracked and managed from a central command center, with data guiding the distribution of supplies and personnel. This is governance with reflexes measured in milliseconds, binding citizens to the state through an invisible, constant exchange of information. The digital road also defines the modern economy. Globalized commerce is entirely dependent on this infrastructure. A designer in Milan finalizes a shoe sketch, and the file is sent instantly to a factory in Vietnam. A farmer in Kenya checks global commodity prices on a mobile phone to decide when to sell his harvest. Financial markets in New York, London, and Tokyo operate as a single, ceaseless entity because data moves faster than any physical good ever could. These digital highways have created a new kind of territory, a virtual space where businesses, large and small, operate on a planetary scale, bound together by their shared reliance on the flow of data. This flow, however, creates new forms of connection and profound new forms of control. Social media platforms and communication networks can unite diaspora communities across continents, fostering cultural continuity that defies geography. Yet, that same infrastructure allows for the surveillance of public sentiment, the shaping of narratives, and the potential restriction of access. A state can, with a few commands, slow or filter the digital traffic entering its borders, creating a kind of sovereign internet, a virtual walled garden that binds its citizens to a curated reality. The very protocols and standards that allow the internet to function, the invisible rules of the digital road, are now subjects of intense geopolitical struggle, as nations vie to ensure the pathways of the future run according to their own design. The binding power is no longer just about moving armies or silver, but about moving bytes, the currency of identity, influence, and power in the 21st century. This is the final evolution of the road, a system that connects not just places, but every person and every device, weaving the world into a coherent, contested, and utterly interdependent digital state. Yet every path of connection casts a long shadow. The same road that carries trade and ideas can also bring conquest and erasure. For indigenous peoples from the Andes to the Great Plains, the arrival of imperial highways often meant the end of a world. These new paths did not merely cross their lands, they redrew them, imposing foreign borders, laws, and economies that shattered ancient ways of life. The road became a vector not for exchange, but for replacement, its very presence a declaration that a new order now owned the landscape. This process of cultural erosion was rarely an accident. It was policy. A standardized imperial road made it easier to move settlers in and to move local populations out, to resettle them in ways that served the state's need for labor and control. Languages, spiritual practices, and social structures that had evolved over millennia found themselves marginalized, not by force of arms alone, but by the quiet, constant pressure of a new logistical reality. The road made the old ways seem distant, impractical, and finally obsolete. Beyond the human cost lies an immense environmental toll. Binding a territory requires conquering its geography, and that conquest leaves deep scars. Ancient road builders felled vast forests to clear their straight paths. Roman engineers drained marshes, forever altering local ecosystems. In our modern age, the scale of disruption has multiplied. The carving of a major highway through a rainforest does more than cut a line in the green. It fragments habitats, isolating species, and opening once impenetrable wilderness to logging, mining, and settlement that spreads from the road like a slow-moving stain. The very act of binding, of making the remote accessible, can unravel the delicate ecological webs that made those places unique. The road, in its quest to connect human communities, often severs the older, vital connections of the natural world. There is a political cost as well woven into the pavement. A centralizing road inherently draws power toward its endpoints. Wealth, talent, and decision-making flow to the capital or the major port cities, leaving the provinces and hinterlands economically depleted and politically sidelined. We see this in the Roman Empire, where all roads led to Rome, draining the provinces of their resources to feed the metropolis. We see it in the modern era, where superhighways can turn vibrant small towns into mere rest stops, their local economies hollowed out as commerce bypasses them at high speed. The road promises connection, but it can also create a stark hierarchy of places, distinguishing between those that are on the map and those that the map merely passes through. Finally, the binding road creates a permanent burden: maintenance. A network is only as strong as its weakest link, and the cost of upkeep is eternal. History is littered with the ghosts of great roads that fell into disrepair the moment the empire that built them faltered. The Roman roads crumbled when the treasury could no longer pay for repairs. The magnificent tambos of the Inca Qhapaq Ñan were reclaimed by the mountain slopes once the imperial administration vanished. This maintenance is not just a financial strain, it is a source of political tension. Who pays for the road and who benefits? Should the wealthy core subsidize the highway through a poor region? Should a local community bear the environmental cost of a road that primarily serves distant markets? The road, once built, demands a forever commitment, a continuous investment of resources and political will to prevent the very bonds it created from fraying back into separation. These limitations remind us that infrastructure is never neutral. Every line drawn on the earth is a choice about what to connect and what to overlook, about what to preserve and what to pave over. The binding road is a testament to human ambition, but its legacy is always a complex tapestry of unity and loss, of order imposed and freedoms diminished. As we stand at the threshold of a digital age, building new networks at the speed of light, we must ask ourselves, what shadows will these new roads cast, and what irrevocable choices are we making with every line of code we lay down? The true lesson of these 25 roads is not found in their stones or cables, but in their relentless repetition. Across 5,000 years, from the couriers of Persia to the data streams of Silicon Valley, the pattern holds. Every ambitious state, regardless of its creed or century, feels the same compulsion to draw lines upon the earth. The technology evolves from hoofbeats on packed dirt to the silent flash of a fiber optic signal, but the political impulse is timeless, a trilogy of desires etched into every mile. The first is the hunger for unity, to turn a collection of disparate lands into a single, governable whole, whether called an empire, a nation-state, or a common market. The second is the need for control, to ensure that the will of the center reaches the farthest edge with speed and certainty, making rebellion futile and integration inevitable. The third is the catalyst of exchange, understanding that roads which carry soldiers and decrees must also carry goods and ideas, for an interconnected territory is a prosperous and thus a stable one. This is the unchanging blueprint of power. The Roman Appian Way, the Chinese imperial courier system, the American interstate, they are all expressions of the same fundamental formula for building a coherent state. We have watched this formula play out across continents and millennia, a story not of 25 separate roads, but of one idea, endlessly rediscovered and rebuilt with the tools of each age. So as we look to the horizon, we can be certain of one thing. The next great binding network is already taking shape. It may be a constellation of satellites knitting the globe into a single internet, or a planned hyperloop corridor beneath an ocean. It might be a virtual reality space that becomes a new frontier for citizenship and commerce. Whatever form it takes, it will serve that ancient, enduring purpose, to shape the geography of human connection according to a new political will, continuing a tradition as old as civilization itself. The path forward, it seems, is always under construction.